Hello, welcome to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where truth wins every time. And let's talk about what that term civilization jihad means and where it comes from. Now, this term was discovered in a document that we actually owe a great deal of thanks to a Maryland transit officer back in 2004. He observed a woman in a burqa taking pictures in the support structure for the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. The officer saw the car that was in. The guy was driving. Of course, the woman wasn't, and she was in a full burqa. So I'm guessing she was probably Sharia compliant and not driving. But here's the thing: this gentleman was wanted by the FBI for questioning. His name is Ismail Abrace, and the man was just wanted for questioning. They went because of the pictures that this great officer discovered him taking. They had reason to do a search warrant on his house. In his basement, they found a hidden sub-basement with 93 bankers' boxes of documents from the North American Muslim Brotherhood. Now, in one document, the explanatory memorandum, which was used in the 2007 trial, the biggest terrorism finance trial the United States has ever conducted, and it was successfully so in 2008. They introduced this evidence both in 2007 2008 from the explanatory memorandum. I'm just going to read you one paragraph. Understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. This process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to this challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. And there is no escape from the destiny, except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers and the mujahideen be equal? This is a statement by the Muslim Brotherhood of North America. They think they are in charge of all Muslims here and basically everywhere. So this is basically a declaration of war if you think about jihad as war. There are different kinds of war, but different kinds of jihad. There's a hot jihad, which you would think about would be action, and there are cold jihad, basically influence type operations, and that basically this is what I say about civilization jihad. It is a term where the Muslim Brotherhood learned basically a lesson from Sun Tzu. Get into your enemy's camp, do what you can to take over from there. And with that said, we have an outstanding guest today. I had the luck of running into Deborah Weiss, who is an attorney, a public speaker, a senior fellow with the Center for Security Policy. I met her with Claire Lopez a couple weeks ago, and she's a bundle of energy. She specializes in free speech and terrorism-related issues. She's considered an expert on the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, CAIR, and Islamist censorship. Formerly, Ms. Weiss was the Manhattan director for the Forbes for President campaign. She's been the assistant corporation counsel in the Giuliani administration and a counsel for the Committee on House Oversight in Congress. Ms. Weiss is the author of a book titled The Organization of Islamic Cooperations, Jihad on Free Speech, as well as the book Council on American-Islamic Relations, Its Use of Lawfare and Intimidation. In her most recently released book, which she's here for today, titled Islamist Influence on Hollywood, she's a contributing author to the book Saudi Arabia and the Global Islamic Terrorist Network, and co-author of a new book titled Ally No More, Erdogan's New Turkish Caliphate and the Rising Jihadist Threat to the West. Ms. Weiss' article have been published in Front Page Magazine, National Review Online, The Weekly Standard, The Washington Times, and many others. And what most people may not know is that she's a survivor from 9/11 when she was in New York City at the time that happened. And with that said, I'm going to bring on Deborah Weiss. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Oh, We ran into each other purely on accident because I didn't know who would be there at the event. It wasn't exactly a showstopper that we went to. It was a surprise, but I am very thankful for listening to you. I had read your book before I went, and since Claire was there, I was going to ask her to introduce me to you if she could. So it just really worked out because I just finished reading your book before I got there. Finished reading it on the plane over. So I want to talk about this book. This is crazy. You have stuff in here that I sat down and I was like, where did you get this information? I was just blowing my mind. So I'm going to start out with the questions. I'm very, very impressed. Deborah, your book, Islamist Influence in Hollywood, exposes a venue of CAIR and other Muslim Brotherhood front groups I had not explored. Your book, like mine, starts out with a 1-2 punch from the explanatory memorandum, which I give on every show. You also state the obvious that people like you and me see. For some reason, politicians are blind to. Basically, we're at war, which is what I just said. We're at war. It's not our choice. It's not our choice. It's a war declared against us. Then you get right into how this war is being waged through influence operation type things. What we might call in the United States, the actual crime would be called sedition. But it's incredible. You get right into it. You talk about CAIR and its influence on Hollywood. Would you tell the audience about this, the influence of CAIR on Hollywood?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to be clear because I like to be very careful and nuanced with my language. I don't want to say that all influence is sedition. Sedition has a legal definition, but
yes.
Certainly influence operations. And CAIR, Council on American-Islamic Relations, is a Muslim Brotherhood front group, as you said. They are basically the North American arm of Hamas. And if you research them or if you read my book on CAIR, you'll see that they have so many of their chapter leaders or people who are affiliated with them in one form or another who sit in jail on charges that, terrorist-related charges. So they are an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial, as you said, and one of their missions is to combat so-called defamation of Islam. And when we say defamation in the American legal system, in order for a comment to be defamatory, it has to be a false statement of fact. But in Islam, it's considered defamation if it's something negative about Islam, even if it's a true statement, or even if it's mere opinion. So CAIR and other Muslim Brotherhood front groups are on a mission to stifle all speech that's negative about Islam, including awareness of Islamic terrorism by trying to dissociate the motivating ideology of Sharia from the terrorist acts. It's on a mission to stifle awareness from persecution of Christians in the Middle East by dissociating Islamic ideology from that persecution, and it is associated. So this is part of their mission. And the book that I had written on CAIR has large segments on their CAIR's censorship efforts in the realm of media, in the realm of stifling politicians, lawsuits they conduct. And the comments that I focus on in this book, in Islamist Influence in Hollywood, focuses on a small portion of CAIR's mission, which is where they try to censor films. So they don't want any terrorists in any movies to be portrayed as Muslim. Nobody has ever said that all Muslims are terrorists. But what CAIR wants is that every time there's a villain in a movie, it can't be a Muslim. It has to be somebody other than a Muslim. And they've done this by a myriad of methods. They've pressured, strong-armed, lobbied producers and scriptwriters for years. And they have been pretty successful at getting scenes from movies cut. And most people aren't aware of this. I can give you a few examples if you want.
Yes, please do.
Oh, okay. So there's a movie called The Sum of All Fears. which was about terrorists and Islamic terrorists in Syria. Originally, it was about Islamic terrorists in Syria, and CAIR was able to get the villains changed to neo-Nazis. Now, I haven't seen the film, but for those who have, I've heard that it doesn't make any sense because I don't think there's a big neo-Nazi movement in Syria, as far as I know. There's another movie called True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger that was also about Islamic terrorists, and they weren't able to get the scenes actually censored, but they were able to get the production company to add a disclaimer saying that the actions and the beliefs of the characters in the film didn't portray any particular religion. Another example is a movie called Kingdom of Heaven, which was about the battle for the soul of Jerusalem. And that production company had prior problems with CAIR, so in order to ward off future problems, they invited CAIR to a pre-screening, and the result of that pre-screening was scenes were cut, and in the end, the Christians were shown as murderers, and the Muslims were considered morally superior. So these are just a handful of samples that I have in the book of CAIR censorship where they haven't been able to persuade or intimidate production companies into censorship. Sometimes they'll have protests outside of movie theaters where they hand out pamphlets and basically just give the production company and the movie theaters a hard time. So that's CAIR.
That's just, it's like they're not as, I should say, as nasty in some ways as Antifa, like in your face when they're out there protesting, but they are just as bad because they're the ones trying to hand out information. I don't think I've ever seen Antifa try to communicate anything.
No, they're not violent, in their protests. But I want to backtrack a little, if I may, now that you bring that up, so that the audience has a broader sense. We're going through the different groups and what these specific groups do. And it was excellent that you gave the framework of the 1991 explanatory memorandum about civilization jihad. But to put this in, give the audience a better understanding, what I uncovered, in my view, amounts to several influence operations. And an influence operation is when a group tries to gain position of power in order to disseminate disinformation and propaganda. So that's the purpose of it, and the reason they do this is they're trying to affect the thoughts and attitudes and ultimately the behavior, policies, and decisions of the target audience. So in the movie industry, the target audience for the Muslim Brotherhood front groups is the general public, so that the ideas that they want you to have about Islam seep into the culture without you even realizing it. But they also have as their target audience law enforcement and national security professionals. And we can talk about that later as we go on. But, it was the great Andrew Breitbart that said politics is downstream from culture. So this is an effort to affect the ideas that are throughout our culture. And as per the 1991 explanatory memorandum, where they admit that they are unable to do this on their own, but would need the hands of the infidels to help them, it expressly states in that memorandum that they plan to form coalitions with, quote, progressive groups. They can't do it by themselves. The conservatives don't seem too interested in helping, although unfortunately I think that's not always the case anymore. But the progressive groups, I guess under the theory that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, have often joined forces with Muslim Brotherhood front groups, whether it's wittingly or unwittingly, to upheave society and make way for their own version of utopia down the road.
That's extremely well put. Thank you. Now, MPAC is the Muslim Public Affairs Council. It's not discussed enough today when we talk about civilization, jihad, and Islamist influence. Yet anyone who knows about MPAC knows that they had a big influence on Obama throughout his presidency. What did you discover about MPAC in Hollywood?
Well, Paul, it's funny because Frank Gaffney, who originally tapped my shoulder to write this book, I said okay, and I thought it sounded like an interesting topic, but in all honesty, I didn't expect to find much. I really thought I was going to come back to him and say, there's really nothing there. Much to my surprise and chagrin, I was so wrong. Muslim MPAC actually has a Hollywood bureau situated in Hollywood, and they have all kinds of programs where they have formed key relationships with bigwigs in Hollywood. They have consulting services on issues of concern for Muslims that are, political, religious, and cultural issues to, quote, put them in context. They hold an annual dinner award where people like the likes of Alec Baldwin and Michael Moore have won awards. They have various programs for Muslims who want to enter the they have like networking events for Muslims who want to enter the filmmaking industry. They offer pre-screenings for producers that want to get Muslim Brotherhood. Well, they might think they want to get Muslim input, but they're getting Muslim Brotherhood input. And they've even recently started sponsoring film festivals, like the prestigious Sundance Film Festival in Colorado, which was founded by Robert Redford.
Oh, what have we done? Holy cow! That we would turn that over to someone who is. Oh, wow! I know I caught that someplace in there, and oh wow! No matter how many times I'll hear that one, it's like a slap in the face. Wow. Your book also discusses several other Islamist-oriented groups that exert influence on Hollywood. You list the Unity Productions Foundation as one group. It's one of the groups I'd never heard of. Ms. Weiss, could you please tell our listeners about Unity Productions Foundation and what they have done to exert some kind of influence over the general public?
Sure. Well, that's one that most people haven't heard of, and I have a fair amount of the book dedicated to them. It is a nonprofit organization which claims to promote peace through media and combat bigotry. It produces documentaries, or they claim that they're documentaries, and often the documentaries are shown on PBS. Now, this group wound up coming to my attention many, many years ago. I don't remember exactly what year they formed, but when they were in their inception, and they had very short films, maybe 5-minute films, I had heard about them and gone to see them, and I watched them grow over the years. And in 2014, I attended a premiere of one of their movies in Washington, D.C., excuse me, and it was called Enemy of the Reich. I don't remember the exact title. It was Enemy of the Reich, the story of Inayat Noor Khan, or Noor Inayat Khan. And they had a panel before the event with people from the State Department and high-level people and the producer. And he was saying how he did this movie because this was about a woman, a Muslim woman, who was motivated by her faith to save Jews during World War II. And even though the actual film didn't expressly state that, he did. He did state that in his presentation. The film kept saying, it was a lot of interviews, and it kept saying that she was motivated by her belief system and by her faith. And I hung out in the lobby afterwards and asked people what they thought about the movie. And the comments seemed to be very similar across the board. They were all like, wow, that was so interesting. I never knew that. Or, wow, I never heard that before. That was really interesting. And I had a different reaction. I came out thinking, gee, I wonder, I've never heard that before. I wonder if it's true. And I spent 2 whole weeks dedicated to researching the woman who was the subject of the film. And what I found was the movie was a mixture of fact and fiction. It is true that there was a woman by her name who was a wire operator in the Allied forces in Britain. And it was a very dangerous job. She had to keep moving around. She absolutely was a courageous woman. It wasn't like she was hiding Jews in her basement, first of all. You know, they kind of made it sound that way. That's not what it was. She joined the Allied forces. And but second of all, and she obviously had principles and morals of humanity and tolerance and love. There was just one problem. She really was not the devout Muslim that the producer claimed she was. Her father was of a Sufi, which can be more mystical and peaceful, not always, but can be. But her father was a member of a particular order within Sufism called the Christie Order, and he himself expressly denounced Islam. He stated he did not believe in religious dogma of any religion, including Islam, and he taught his children, including his daughter, the subject of this film, that all people are equal, that all people deserve to have rights, that his children should love everybody, whether they are Jew, Christian, Muslim, or atheist. His belief system would be considered heretical in any of the Sharia-controlled territories, including Saudi Arabia, the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, it would be a big problem for him to say those things publicly. It's not considered authoritative Islam. So, that was a lie. And I also found that it was conveniently omitted the fact that she was engaged to a Jew. So I'm hard-pressed to believe that was an accident. So when Frank asked me to do this book, even though he asked about Hollywood, I did gear off on a tangent and also cover independent films, and in this case, so-called documentaries. I wound up researching in depth several of the films produced by this UPF, the Unity Productions Foundation, and it was the same pattern. They were often, the evidence I found was that the content portrayed in the films were often a mixture of fact and fiction, which is the classic definition of propaganda. And I also went off on a tangent to see, well, we could talk about there's another organization affiliated with UPF called Muslims on Screen and TV, and they are considered a resource center, and they have a story bank with pre-written stories for anybody who's in Hollywood, whether it's a scriptwriter or producer, if they are going to be addressing any issues on the subject of Islam or related issues, they can just, with the click of a mouse, have their story, all of the stories, needless to say, in that story bank show Islam and Muslims in a positive light. So, and then the final thing I wanted to say about this organization is the two men who founded it are converts to Islam. One of them, Alex Kronemer, used to work in the State Department and the U.S. Institute for Peace. His partner and co-founder, Michael Wolff, converted and was a producer prior to this, and both of them have maintained their contact with Hollywood and the U.S. government throughout all of this. So they are, at this point, very well funded. Their movies are very high production quality. They get funded largely from the Middle East and North Africa, and unfortunately from two of our government agencies as well. And Alex Kronemer's wife has an LLC called Connecting Cultures. She says that she's a training specialist on cross-cultural and like Islamic awareness and cross-cultural sensitivity or something along those lines. And they're a GSA-approved contractor, which means that the government has approved her organization to be a contractor for federal agencies. And using some of UPF's films, her organization has, quote, trained the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, TSA, and under the Obama administration, hundreds of U.S. attorneys across the country to correct their alleged misperceptions on Islam. So That's it in a nutshell. But I mean, if you want me to talk more, I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. But UPF, I can tell you that the films, unlike other mainstream Hollywood production companies, where their purpose is just really to make a profit and entertain people on Saturday night, UPF has a myriad of programs where they use the films for other purposes. For example, they have an interface. They use them for interfaith programs. Where they have dialogues. They show the film and then they have dialogues. They use them for schools. They send them out to high schools and colleges with lesson plans for teachers. They have now they have plans for kindergartners where they show them a film on Ramadan and have lesson plans for ages 5 through K through 12, and they have other programs. They also have made presentations to the Pentagon. UPF has made presentations to the Pentagon, to the National Counterterrorism Center, to the Boston Police. So, I'm not in a position to read their minds. I suppose they could argue that this was all, innocuous from their point of view. But what I can tell you is all the evidence reasonably points to an influence operation. They are using their films seem to be using their films for the purpose of persuading people to their point of view on Islam, including, most importantly, law enforcement and national security.
Now, I have a question from the chat room, and this is from Kel, one of the hosts of our shows on Global Patriot Radio. She's asking if you have an opinion on Roseanne 2.0. She featured a Muslim family in her show, portrayed them as victims. I don't know if you're aware of that show.
I'm not aware of that particular show, but it's a pattern. And it has been seeping into the culture. So even when you don't have a Muslim Brotherhood front group or some kind of Islamic group that seems to be pushing their narrative, as we established early in the show, they've formed alliances with progressive groups, and Hollywood is obviously part of that, whether it's TV, for example, the show 24 it started out okay, and I don't know if you noticed it changed over time. There were scenes cut from that once CAIR got involved, that's part of the whole thing is, Muslims are the victim, because of course if you look around the globe, you can see that's what the problem is. Muslims are the victims, right? So,
that explains why I stopped watching 24, because there was a point where things just seemed totally backwards.
Yeah. I saw a show. It was a rerun. It was NYPD Blues from after 9/11, and they had an African American cop and his girlfriend snuggling up in bed. Something happened, and he had been suspicious of some Arab guy or some Muslim guy, and he starts telling her, oh, yeah, I have to admit I'm guilty. I was suspicious just because he was Muslim or Arab, the same way people were bigoted against African Americans. And they're trying to equate people who have legitimate concerns about Islamic terrorism or religious persecution of minorities in Muslim majority countries, and they're trying to equate those legitimate concerns with people who were bigoted against Catholics when they first got to America, or bigoted against people because of their skin color, which is an immutable characteristic. There was another movie recently that I originally wanted to go see until I saw the trailer. It was called Red Scarlet, and it was about a ballet dancer who became a CIA operative. Which,
wow.
Yeah, I used to be a dancer, and I'm going to become a CIA operative. And then I'm just joking about that. But she was assigned to some case on a bombing, and even in the dialogue on the trailer, she was saying, "Oh, it's the Russians who did this." And the question in the trailer from the person in the trailer it wasn't someone Muslim? No, it wasn't someone Muslim. It was the Russians. So they had to add that in there. They couldn't say, just who it was, but they had to say it wasn't Muslims. And on top of that, why was it the Russians? Because you can see suicide bombings and bombings all over the world by the Russians, right? So this is what I'm talking about. People who don't follow these issues, if you keep hearing this over and over in your schools, in your churches, in your media, and it's in your face all the time, and you're not even aware that this message is being sent, then it's going to seep into the back of your mind and influence how you think, and that's the goal.
Well, we actually, I'm just going to break in. I'm just going to comment that this is a great thing you just mentioned, and as a school teacher, I was just talking with some students about some movies I would recommend for them to watch. One was Red Dawn, and it talks about the Russians, and they even give the reasons why in the Red Dawn the Russians attack us. It's in the height of the Cold War, and there's a couple of movies that come out about that same time. One has to do with taking over the Alaskan pipeline, and it all has to do with Reagan doing what he can to exert influence for communism to eventually fall, and that was he had a grain embargo at one point. So they freak out, and these are movies. They're just make-believe. But the fact is, even in these movies, they explained why, their reasoning behind. That was a political reason that we would be starving their countrymen. That was the reasoning they gave. But I fail to see any reason for. I have to say. It's not the end of the Cold War where the Russian generals were on their own and doing what they could. So this doesn't make any sense. I'm glad you pointed out. Let's go on. I want to get into this one group called the Islamic Scholarship Fund. I read that name, and it just seemed like a contradictory name and a mission from what I read. And it kind of surprised me. I was wondering if you could tell them about that particular group.
Well, what about it surprised you?
Well, the word scholarship. I think it's scholarship. I think we're giving money to somebody to go to school. I'm not thinking they're going to become an influence group to change the opinions of people. That just it conflicts with everything that because again I'm the school teacher. I think these are going to help kids get to school. But
well, you can have scholarships not just for academics. You can have scholarships to ballet schools or film schools or
for vocational
schools.
Programs too. Yes, this
and what would you say?
This just from what I was reading, it just seemed contradictory to me because when I think about you're saying you're raising funds to put kids through school. That's what it sounds like. A scholarship fund. You're raising. It doesn't matter if it's a vocational program. It doesn't matter if it's an academic program. The idea is you're raising funds. So I don't know if that's what they do from all of what I read, but I do. I was kind of surprised because the amount of influence they were exerting and how they were doing it. This kind of surprised me.
They're offering scholarships to Muslims, encouraging them to become filmmakers and scriptwriters. And it's basically a financial incentive to enter that field, and it's predicated on ideology that you and I would consider Muslim Brotherhood ideology, even though the ISF, Islamic Scholarship Fund, isn't listed in that memorandum because they're more recent than that. They're not giving out the money to anybody who's Muslim who wants to make a movie. It has to be on the subject of Islam, and they're very open about what their goal is. That's what was surprising to me, is unless they changed their website since I've written this book, they're very open that their mission is to influence the public narrative on Islam. And they also have an alliance with MPAC on a congressional leadership development program, and that program places Muslims in congressional internships. So this shows you that they're only interested in subject matter areas which have an influence on the narrative of Islam in the public sphere. And they say that on their own website. They want positive narratives on Islam and Muslims, If you make a film that meets that ideological test, you have available to you, you can apply to have scholarships and grants for $10,000 or $20,000, quite high amounts. They have events designed to encourage Muslims to enter politics in the media to effectuate social change. And they, it's basically what we call dawah. It's like they'll think of it as Islamic evangelizing. I think of it more as propaganda. But let's put it this way. If you're Muslim and you want to become a doctor or a scientist, you need not apply. So.
I was like, this is it is pretty specific. You're right. The mission. When I looked at what they were doing, you did quite well covering that. I want to say thank you because again, it's another group I had never heard of, and this is the kind of thing I look for when I look for good authors. Your book points out one of the most telling features of these organizations, their protests of truly patriotic American films. Could you share a little bit about that, please?
Well, that's mostly CAIR also, and I guess some of the Muslim groups. Anytime America's at war, and it happens to be in a Muslim-majority country, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan, you'll get groups like CAIR protesting the films, especially on college campuses. So they've protested American Sniper, which anyone in the audience who hasn't seen that film, I highly recommend that you go rent it. With who's the guy? Who was the main guy in that? You saw that movie, didn't you?
Is that Kiefer Sutherland?
No.
I don't.
No.
Oh no, Chris. Okay, anybody in the chat room know
I'm not good with actors' names. I very rarely go to a mainstream movie, but I have to tell you, it was produced. God, why are the names escaping me? Because I never go to mainstream movies. It was an excellent film.
I'm not a person who knows
really good,
names
and it was
either.
based on a true story. It was a huge box office hit. And, there was nothing in that film either that was saying, all Muslims are terrorists or let's kill all Muslims. But they just have to shut down anything like that. And then there was a documentary called Honor Diaries, which was about how Muslim women are treated in the Middle East. I'm not even sure. I saw it, but it was a long time ago. I'm not even sure they said anything expressly about Islam, although they should have if they did.
They really did not. I was present at the viewing here in Rochester, New York, and I actually met one of the ladies, and spent time with her with Daniel Pipes. So, yes.
Right. So it was about how Muslim women are treated in the Middle East, how they're not allowed to go outside by themselves. They have to have a male escort. They have to be covered. There's a lot of domestic violence there. Yeah, so I guess they left out the reason, which is definitely related to Sharia and how the if you want to call them values of that ideology has seeped into the culture. But CAIR tried to shut that down also. It was on International Women's Day or something like that. They had on college campuses to raise awareness about violence against women. A lot of the campuses were scheduled to show this event. And CAIR didn't actually dispute any of the claims that were made in the film. They were just trying to attack the producers, the individual producers, as Islamophobes. And that's why, according to them, that's why they shouldn't have the film. So
yeah, the big complaint was that Jewish people made the film.
Jewish people, I say. Well, then you definitely can't trust them. Yeah.
I was present during one of these type of things where they were arguing, and I sat there and laughed. So nothing's untrue in the movie, but your only problem is that you're an anti-Semite, and that's your problem. You're anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I mean, I heard that their argument was that they were Islamophobes, but either way, they didn't disagree with or dispute anything that was in the film. So, yeah. So we have a lot of...
okay. The name of the actor that you were looking for was Chris Kyle. Chris
Kyle was the actual sniper. He was the real-life person.
Okay, Chris Kyle. Okay. All right, so I've got the... I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's not the one who played he's who the real life person was, who portrayed it was somebody Cooper.
As you can tell, this is one movie I haven't seen.
Oh, you must see it. Yeah.
Oh, and they're saying the book is excellent too. So I have a couple more questions.
There's a lot of they're getting more involved in. Here it is, Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper. Okay.
Is the actor, and it was produced by Clint Eastwood. And I will say that both of them got a lot of pressure because of their quote Islamophobic movie to try to help Muslim causes and do something to rectify it, and both of them declined. So I have to give them credit for that. So, yeah, and a lot of the Muslims who are interested in filmmaking are getting involved in independent films now because it's easier for them to break into that than into a mainstream movie. They have more control over the content. They have Muslim film festivals sometimes, a lot of them producing anti-Israel films, movies about Islam, movies about the Middle East. And then you have a lot of actors who are basically apologists for Islam. And obviously Ben Affleck, if you saw him on that show with Bill Maher, where he had a conniption fit when Bill Maher said that, Islam is against liberal values and liberals should be speaking up. Michael Moore, who stood outside Trump Tower saying we are all Muslim. And prior to this last election, I will say that what I found in my research was that the influence went mostly in one direction, from Islamist groups into Hollywood and filmmaking. And while the producers and scriptwriters were accepting it or tolerating it or saying okay, they weren't actively participating. But I do think that to some degree that has changed after this last election. I think there's so many people in Hollywood, in the left and some on the right, the never Trumpers. I'm not saying you have to love Trump, but that's very different than being never Trump. And I think people on the left who were just so sure that Hillary was going to win have just gone bonkers since this election. And there's nothing that this president can do right. And they seem to be incapable of having an intellectual political debate about the issues at hand. Should we or should we not have stronger borders? Should we or should we not have better vetting procedures for people who come into our country? Should we or should we not enforce the laws that we have on the books for immigration? These are all legitimate questions, but if you forget about what your answer is, if you want to even raise the issue, then you are a bigot, an Islamophobe, a xenophobe, and a racist. And that's especially true because Trump supports those ideas. So when he came out with that executive order, which was portrayed as
totally
a Muslim
legal.
ban,
it was totally legal too. It's part of his job
totally
responsibility.
Legal, and not only that, it wasn't a ban and it wasn't Muslim. It was everybody from those countries, whether they were Christian, Muslim, or other. There were exceptions on a case-by-case basis. It included 2 countries that weren't even Muslim majority. It excluded many, many countries that are Muslim majority. And the list of countries was created by Obama. But, let's just ignore all that and call it a Muslim ban, and then we can have Hollywood,
then blame
standing
Trump
up at rallies and podiums talking about how what an Islamophobic bigot Trump is, and siding, wittingly or not, with people and organizations that, if they had their way, would undermine everything the left claims to hold dear. These organizations that they're working with, they don't really believe in gay rights and women's rights and free expression. They don't believe in any of that. So, that's what's going on.
So one of the things I want to ask, I ask every...
Sure you know that, Paul?
Sorry, what?
The red-green axis,
Yes.
We have the Muslim and the communist/socialists have aligned, and basically they're working to undermine our culture. It's like in Israel, you wouldn't think that Hamas and Hezbollah would join forces because Hamas is a Sunni organization and Hezbollah is Shia, but they know what's important, and the important thing is to get rid of Israel. So they join forces for that cause. And I would say similarly, in order to upheave American societal order and the Judeo-Christian values that our freedom is based on, the Islamist organizations and the far-left organizations have joined forces to undermine what we have now.
Well, one of the things I do with every guest is ask them what they think should be done to solve some of the problems we've been talking about. Your book actually proposes solutions, which makes it really good. That makes it valuable. So go out and buy this book by Deborah Weiss. You've got to go out there and buy Influence, the Islamist Influence on Hollywood.
In Hollywood.
Ms. Weiss, some of Deborah Weiss's suggestions show she has a sense of humor, too. So you'll appreciate reading that. But even these suggestions that are somewhat humorous are 100% on the mark.
Well, which ones did you find humorous?
Oh, I have to go back. But I'll tell you, I thought there was a little bit of sense of humor in some of the ways you addressed. I was very impressed.
Thank you.
So what would you suggest?
Well, I can say that the number one thing is to keep informed. I mean, if you're just too busy, I understand people have their jobs and their families and they're very busy. But, I think it's a grave mistake to take the freedom we have for granted. Our country is under assault. We're under attack. The whole West is. And you can't assume that America as we have it today will be here forever. It was something that was hard fought, hard won by the blood, sweat, and tears of our forefathers, and there is no guarantee that it's going to continue to be this way. You have to really understand what's going on. You can't rely on MSNBC and CNN or the mainstream media. So you have to keep informed, educate your children, your family, your neighbors. If you belong to a church, I would say you have to find a way to stop those, what I call interfaith bullcrap seminars. I mean, the interfaith movement has largely been co-opted by Muslim Brotherhood front groups. I've been to several events, and invariably there's somebody up there who, if not formally affiliated with a Muslim Brotherhood front group, shares its views. And they are there for the purpose of disseminating disinformation on an unwitting audience that means well, that wants to know more, that doesn't want to have bigotry and discrimination. And the people in the audience really don't know. They really don't know, but it is incumbent on the pastor to know who they're putting on the panel, and before they start feeding this crap to their congregations. And it is crap, and it's dangerous crap, because it's the same groups that are trying to say Islam's a religion of peace, and their victims are the same ones who behind the scenes are supporting Hamas, supporting terrorism, supporting the downfall of our government. It's the same groups. They want, their ultimate goal is to have one nation, the nation of Islam, with a caliphate and worldwide Sharia law that would be imposed on everyone, Jew, Christian, Muslim, atheist, with different sets of laws, if you're Muslim or not Muslim, different sets of laws, if you're male or female, capital punishment if you're gay. This is what their goal is. And if they can get you to believe that they are the victims, that they are harmless, that they deserve protection, that they deserve special protections under the guise of religious accommodation, or to be, quote, respectful, when what they really mean is to be compliant, then this is a big problem. And it is incumbent upon everyone in your audience to make sure that your church or synagogue does not participate in this. I know a woman who did address her pastor, and when she got no results, she got a whole bunch of people in her congregation together, and they all threatened to leave and take their annual dues with them. And guess what? That program was dropped. So I think also keep an eye on your children's textbooks. They are completely brainwashing your children, and this is only one of the many issues on which they're doing it. They're indoctrination centers now. I don't know if there's a way you can homeschool your kids or send them to a religious, like a Christian school or a Jewish school. But you have to be very careful with what their diet they're fed in their brains these days. If you have the time, run for school board. I think it would be nice if the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act were passed. That's a bill that was proposed in the last Senate or 2 Senates ago by Ted Cruz to encourage the State Department to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. It's designated a terrorist organization in Egypt. CAIR, separately, is designated a terrorist organization in the UAE, and yet it operates with impunity in America. The government on a local level, on a state level, on every level, as well as law enforcement and corporations, should cut all ties with these groups. They shouldn't be getting sensitivity training from them. They shouldn't be getting cross-cultural, multicultural training from groups that believe in gender and religious apartheid. And I think it's important to really inculcate in your children about our founding fathers. There are books designed for children so they can learn more about that. And to really, at the root, it's about education and morals and values, to install Judeo-Christian morals and values upon which our freedom is based, upon which this country is based, and without that, everything else is going to be lost. You cannot come here and just reap the financial benefit of what we have, because what we have was based on principles that we have, principles of personal responsibility, not collective responsibility, principles of opportunity, not the right to have free stuff. You know, it just goes on and on. So I think the final thing I'd say is we have to understand the enemy threat doctrine. We have to stop pussyfooting around and call a spade a spade. I don't think there are very many people who care if somebody wants to pray 5 times a day or, you know, whatever clothes they want to wear. I know some people are opposed to it, but that's not the problem. That's the symptom. You know, to the extent that Islam has a religious component, I don't think anybody cares if they practice that and it ends there. But when it crosses the line over into a political ideology that they want imposed on everyone else, that's going to infringe on my freedom, on my constitutional rights, that's a problem, and that's what's going on. Nobody wants to mention it because it's cloaked in the language of religion, but we have the right and the obligation to call out threats no matter where they come from, even if they're cloaked in the language of religion. So we have to be able to say I'm not saying everyone who calls himself a Muslim, because some people aren't, they don't adhere to Sharia. It's just like that's what their heritage is or their background, the same way there are people who call themselves Christian and they're not Christian, or Jewish and they're not Jewish. But for those who embrace Sharia, we have to realize that it is the threat and the war that you mentioned is not about the violence. The violence is a tactic. It is an ideological threat. We have to name it, mention it, address it. And the other thing is, with this book, the reason I think this book is important is because most people who go to the movies don't realize any of this. I didn't realize any of this. And as I said, the culture seeps into you without you realizing it, whether it's movies or television or music. The culture is the precondition, sets the ideas that are spread in the culture, sets the precondition for what kinds of laws the public is willing to pass down the road. So if we have a series of influence operations occurring and you don't realize it, then they can be more effective. So the first thing is to raise awareness and to realize that this is what's going on. They're allowed to make whatever movies they want, even, I suppose, even if they're false. I don't think it's right to call it a documentary if it's false information, but they can make any kind of movies they want. That's not what I'm talking about. They're trying to control what other people are doing. They're trying to control and or influence and stop mainstream producers from doing what they want to do. So you can see the totalitarian aspect of it and the control. All I can say is that influence operations are most effective when people don't know they're being waged, and I'm hoping that this book will shine a light on what's going on in the darkness, the manipulation that goes on behind the silver screen, and ultimately that when the truth comes to light, we'll be able to use that so that freedom will prevail.
Well, thank you. I want to we're closing down the end of the hour, and I want to make sure I don't let you go without you sharing more about how people can follow your work and how they can support your work at the Center for Security Policy.
Oh, that's really nice of you. I'm like a one-person operation, and I really need to do more work on how to get everything together. I do have a website. It's not totally updated because I just don't have enough help and I'm swamped, but it's www.vigilancenow.org. You can contact me through the contact page. I do check that every day or two. If you want me to come and speak, if you have an organization or, where you want me to come and speak like that. The book and the proceeds do go to Center for Security Policy, can be found on Amazon, Amazon.com. And in terms of the other stuff, because I've done a lot of work that's actually not on my website, like I was a speaker in Canada for Motion 103. If you Google my name, Deborah Weiss, and free speech, my name, and Motion 103, my name, you'll find a lot. So, yeah, anybody who wants to support my work, if you can contact me through my website. I appreciate the plug, Paul.
Oh, I was there at the conference. I didn't realize who you were at that time. Claire was pointing you out. I didn't catch it until afterwards.
You were at the Canadian conference?
Yes. I live right across the pond.
I was the first speaker. I was the first speaker. Were you there in the morning?
Yeah, and Claire pointed you out right away to me, and it never dawned on me till you mentioned that later on.
Oh. Yep, that was me.
Yeah, and I wish I had known then. I'm just very impressed. Thank you for all your hard work.
I actually don't have all the information. It'll be in June, I think on June 21st. It hasn't been promoted yet, but I'll be doing a webinar on Islamist censorship and its role in the Michigan governor's race, because one of the candidates is a Muslim, and so I'm going to talk about that. So you can.
We're going to keep really close touch with you then, because I'm going to have to keep in touch, because I'm working with a friend who's Sharia Crime Stoppers. I had him on recently.
Well, they're the ones going to be doing the webinar.
Yeah, then I'll be definitely listening to that, and I will promote that on my next show, because that's going to be coming up. I did not think to do that. Thank you for pushing that out. That is something we all have to watch, people. Michigan's next governor could be a national security threat. Thank you for joining us, and we'll definitely have to have you back. God bless. Thank you.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Wow. She is a power-packed bundle of energy. I'm glad to have had the chance to have her on. I've had chance to meet her in person. It was exciting. I forgot to mention you were there, Cal. I'm sorry. We were both there. I look at Motion 103 as, even though it's across the pond to me and it is in Canada, the pond being like Ontario, I'm concerned that my friends in Canada could have lost their freedom of speech. So I did what I could. And at first it meant attending meetings. And now it means to me that I go and I speak at Pegida Canada events whenever I get a chance. I'll try to be up there at one of the next ones in June. There was just too much going on in May. Wow. Go out, pick up Deborah Weiss's books. Please go out and take a look at her work. What an outstanding woman. I do want to get into the news of the day. Now, there's some really interesting pieces of news out there, and I think I'm going to save one of these stories. I'm going to see if I can get Joe Kaufman to come on again and talk about one. But how about this one? I picked this one out of Fox News. It shocks me. New York City school holds moment of silence for victims of Israel-Gaza border violence. New York City school's decision to hold a moment of silence for Palestinian victims last week's violence at the Israel-Gaza border has enraged some parents. Rightfully so, if you ask me. The New York Post reported parents outraged at school. that students at the Beacon School in Manhattan were asked to pause to pay tribute to more than 60 Palestinians killed. By the way, the 60 we're talking about were Hamas. So they want to pause to give tribute to Hamas. Wait, that's a terrorist. These are terrorist group, a terrorist recognized group by the United States. So they wanted to a moment of silence for terrorists. Why do I know they were terrorists? Because Hamas admitted these people were terrorists. So the New York City school held a moment of silence for terrorists. Those parents were right to scream and yell and throw a fit. Another big news in the United States this week, and let me get this one out. This is a showstopper type thing that makes people stop and go, "What?" And this is out of Peoria, Arizona. Peoria school apologizes for most likely to bomb the USA yearbook superlative. Now, this is by Sanu Wasu. It appeared in ABC15.com. Now, there's a couple of things that have problems with this article. So I'm just going to start out, and then I'm going to tell you what I think the problems are. This article starts out, it's a yearbook controversy, which has a Valley Charter School issuing an apology to parents Monday night. Parents who just received, by the way, this came out on May 14th. Parents who just received the yearbook from Sonoran Science Academy were in disbelief after seeing a page in which a student with a Muslim first name was voted most likely to bomb the USA. Now, here's the problem with this communication. The words voted, because that is not the truth. Okay? So pay attention while I'm telling you that. The word voted should be no place in this article. Bree Brown has an 11-year-old daughter at the school and said her daughter showed her the post over the weekend and appeared disturbed by it. Down and read most likely to bomb the USA, and I just sat there for a second and thought, no way, this is not happening. Brown said, I thought it was a joke. I didn't believe her at first, added her husband, Keon Brown. The parents wondered how something like that could have made it to the printer and been published with no oversight from school administrators. It was missed. There's a faculty advisor in charge of the school book. They didn't catch it. The parents also questioned other posts in the yearbook. It was all part of survey school staff said that they gave students. Questions included voted most likely to and favorite memory. The kind of questions you see in every yearbook, almost every rite of passage for the graduating class. In this case, school officials said there was no vote. See what I'm saying? The word vote should never have been in here. The words most likely to bomb. See, now let me read this again. In this case, school officials said there was no vote. Students filled the blanks in themselves. The 8th grader himself wrote it in. He wrote it in about himself, most likely to bomb the USA. So the principal apologizes to everybody. Why? He should apologize only because the persons responsible for editing, the staff members, should have been doing their job and weren't. And I can understand him apologizing for that. Should he have apologized for the student writing that? It should have been very clear that this was done by the student himself. So this principal should not have apologized. He should have pointed the finger at the kid and the teacher who did not do his or her job as an editor. And apologize, yes, we didn't catch it, because I'll say it was the principal's job as well to get the final approval. I think that should have happened also, and I don't think that principal ever let that fly again. But that happened in Arizona. How about this one? This is a little bit late. It's all relative. But Islam is best, says George Mason University president, by none other than Andrew E. Herod. I love this guy. This is in the New English Review. Andrew Harry and I met this for the first time in person when I met Deborah Weiss. So that was good time to be there. At the 2018 Middle East Dialogue Conference at Washington, D.C.'s Whitmore House last month, George Mason University President George Mason University Professor Daryl Norman Burrell whitewashed Islamism and exaggerated Islam's role in American culture. His Islamophobia lecture reflected the gathering, sometimes a historical radical chic, the political commentator Mark Brzezinski captured succinctly in earlier remarks. Together, the willful distortions of reality offered a microcosm of systematic, moral, and intellectual problems besetting the Middle East studies. Declaring Hamas leaders as are more dignified, more thoughtful, more aware of history than popularly perceived. Okay, so the terrorist leaders are more dignified. I'm not going to believe that, sorry. We got rid of Abu Marzouk. How about Ahmed Yusuf? They're like, okay, well, these guys are honorable. No, sorry, that's why they're gone. Sorry. It's a good article. I'm going to recommend people pick it up. New English Review. The article again is, it's all relative, but Islam is best, says George Mason University. Yeah, like really, they're gonna have some truth out there on this topic. Not happening. Okay. Now, Canada has had some issues. Very, very scary issue in the news, and it's been up yesterday and today. There's an article that's been making the news, and it's about Bracebridge Beach. Bracebridge temporarily shuts down 2 beaches after disturbing discovery. This is by globalnews.ca. And unfortunately, I have a pop-up that blocked the author's name. Shalin is all I can see for the name. Let me read this article, and then I'll tell you my comments on this. I'll try to keep my comments until after the article. I will try. The May-long weekend attracts thousands of beach lovers to Ontario's cottage country. But this year, 2 popular destinations were temporarily closed. Kirby's Beach and Bracebridge Bay Park were closed after glass shards and sewing needles were discovered. Brad Hammond's home is nestled along the waterfront at Kirby's Beach. My family's been at Muskoka since 1882, he explained. Hammond said this is the first time he's seen the beach closed. Several weeks ago, hazardous objects began turning up. Hammond's wife spent 8 to 9 hours combing the beach herself and managing to fill a pail with her finds. It was pretty much the width of the beach, but it was in clumps, so you couldn't tell if it had been seated in different areas, he said, of the objects. Residents have collected items from as far as 60 feet away from the shoreline. The beach itself attracts thousands of people, including many young families with children. On Monday, a diving team was brought in from Scuba Shack in nearby Gravenhurst. They were contacted by the town to conduct a search and clean up the shoreline. The gloves they are wearing, I believe they have all Kevlar palms to them, said Jane Marr of Scuba Shack. We also have handheld magnets that help. From the glass perspective, we're hoping that there are more chunks. Bracebridge Mayor Graydon Smith said the discovery of the needles and glass goes beyond what municipal staff would typically encounter after a spring melt. What remains unclear is who is responsible. Ontario Provincial Police are now investigating the discovery and whether it may be linked to a disturbing letter that was mailed to the local newspaper, the Huntsville Forester. We need to make a determination whether or not it is directly associated to the threat that has been received, said OPP Sergeant Peter Leon. Second of all, we need to determine who the author of the threat in fact was. Leon said police are working closely with regional municipalities. The beaches are a very important and vital part of Ontario's summer vacation life, and we want to make sure that anybody who does venture out onto any of our beaches can do so safely and without compromise. The letter threatened the safety of beaches in Muskoka region. It was titled A Message from the Islamic Revolutionary Force, although its legitimacy has yet to be confirmed by the police. Glass shards were also found on at least one beach in Gravenhurst last month. Police have not confirmed any correlation between the letter and the appearance of the hazardous materials. Now, listen to this quote. Yes, we have destroyed your beaches over the winter months with snowmobiles. The letter reads, making them unsafe and all but unusable. It claims the region makes for easy targets. The letter, which was received by the paper on May 11th, was then forwarded to the towns of Bracebridge and Gravenhurst, and they were sent to the OPP. I don't know the legitimacy of it, and it's not my place to figure it out. It's theirs, the policeman said. So it's in the right hands. So we'll work with them to make sure that they're getting everything they need to make a determination of its legitimacy, or it's just a hoax. So here's my comments, and I'll give the best I can. This is a situation that when you read the original threat, it sounded there were cultural disconnects in the letter of how to communicate. They were saying that they destroyed the beaches by driving snowmobiles over them. So now my question is, was there a cultural disconnect or was it a problem of communication? Because they didn't say how they left the beaches. They didn't say how they made them unusable. I have been following this story since it first released about a week, it's a little bit more than a week ago that this first started. Now, my question is, since, the people who discovered this stuff didn't, say where they found things. Hopefully they're designating to the police where they found stuff and how they found stuff. If we were going to look at things forensically, you would look and see, is there a way to tell if, snowmobiles were used to disperse this stuff? And they're saying they're in clumps. Were they dropping stuff out of bags like glass and needles and things like that while they're driving through them? This is something to be concerned about. Now, while they have claimed the responsibility for this kind of stuff, I don't know. I honestly don't know. It sounds like a teenager or a person who has a cultural disconnect from Canadian society. And I say disconnect because they don't know how to correctly communicate what their message is. So they make it hard to believe them. And I think that's a big problem. And I hope to God it's not what we think. It's not what's being thought. That's my best statement on this. I unfortunately don't have more to say. Let's get into some of the news overseas. Jihad Watch, an article by John Hall on May 22nd. Netherlands, 1,400 underage Dutch girls forced into sex slavery by migrant ground males. So another place besides Britain is suffering the same problem. What does this all due to? Could it be mass migration of Muslims? Oh, well, yes. Okay, so let me just get into this article. In a startling report, the Dutch newspaper Algemeen Dagblad, AD, it has been revealed that more than 1,000 girls will be blackmailed and forced will be forced into prostitution over the course of a year in the Netherlands. The article discusses the work of Watch Netherlands, a cooperative organization between the Center Against Children and Human Trafficking, and Fire and Terre de Home, an aid organization. Watch Netherlands operates from an action center in Randstad with a dozen researchers and IT specialists who search for evidence of child exploitation after it is reported by parents, taxi drivers, or even the victims of the sexual abuse themselves. The AD article makes reference to, quote, lover boys, sex traffickers, of whom the lion's share has a migrant background. The report by AD also reveals that Watch Netherlands transferred more than 70 cases to authorities last year. Watch Netherlands investigated how many victims a sex trafficker ensnares, where the children are offered for sale and where victims are kept hidden. The organization even has private detectives that are sent out to observe on location and gather evidence. Does anybody see a pattern developing here? Does it sound like we're talking about what Britain stupidly calls grooming? It's rape, you idiots. It's rape. So we have rape gangs in the Netherlands. We have rape gangs where these Muslims, mass migrants appear. How about this one? This is from Breitbart. French government warned of potential riots after court demands Muslims take down Ramadan tents. By Chris Tomlinson. This is May 22nd. French authorities have been warned that Muslims could set fire to the neighborhood in one of Paris's migrant-populated suburbs following a court order to take down a number of tents erected for Ramadan. An administrative court ordered the tents, which were erected in the commune of Severn in northeast Paris, to be taken down as they were placed in a private car park, Les Parisiens said. The mayor and the Muslim organizer, the tents, which are used to house Muslims praying during the holy month of Ramadan, were given until Tuesday to remove the installations by the court, fueling anger and warnings that the situation could escalate into riots. If the tents are not removed by Tuesday's deadline, the city could face fines of £2,000 per day, 2,000 euros per day. Mustafa Arar, Secretary General in local association, said it has been 4 years since we installed the tents on this parking lot at the furthest place from the houses. So they're not going to do it. And whether they get charged the fourth, and they're talking about charging not the people who put it up, but they're talking about charging the city or the town where they are. That's just a little crazy. How about this one from France? Macron demands mayors be told about local Islamic radicals to help fight terrorism. French President, and this is again by Chris Tomlinson from Breitbart, May 23rd, today. French President Emmanuel Macron has called on the government and the security services to share more information on Islamic radicals with local mayors to help the fight against radical Islamic terrorism. President Macron made the statements on Tuesday, lamenting the fact that many local mayors had previously told him they were interested in helping the fight against terrorism, but did not even know if they had residents on the terror watch list, known in France as the S-file. Mayors are ready to do more, Macron said, and added, a lot of mayors say, I have insecurity at home. I have S-files. I do not know what I would like to know. By the month of July, the Minister of Interior will make a concrete proposal so that we can engage with mayors in this area, he added. Around 20,000 individuals are designated S-file across, how many did I just say? 20,000 in France. Yeah. Is there a way they can watch that many people? The mayors know. It's nice to know who could be a potential terrorist in your neighborhood. Oh my God. I'm just going to read the headline for this one. You can choose to read it if you want to. This is another Breitbart article. European court estimates over 90 million EU residents are first or second generation migrants. So they're trying to change the population out in the EU. That's part of their goal, I think. Here's another one. I keep talking about something called Islamization of knowledge. In Islamization of knowledge, nothing is acceptable until it goes through the prism of the Quran and Sharia. So if it's acceptable to Sharia, it's okay. That means you have to rewrite history. Keep that in mind. So here's the next article, again by Chris Tomlinson, and this came out May 18th. Excuse me. Broadcaster. Ramadan, an old German custom, celebrated longer than Oktoberfest. What? German radio broadcaster Deutschland Funk Kultur has claimed that the Islamic holy month of Ramadan is not only an old German custom, but that it had been celebrated in the country longer than Oktoberfest. I don't think so. In an article, journalist Aaron Gufferkin claims that Ramadan is a thoroughly German holiday and that there is no question that Islam belongs to Germany. Gufferkin maintains the practice is older than Oktoberfest, also known in Bavaria as Weissen. While he provides no evidence for his assertion, the earliest Weissen celebrations are thought to have been held on October 12, 1810, to celebrate the marriage of Prince Ludwig, later King Ludwig I, and Princess Therese of Saxony-Hildenbergenhausen. The oldest mosque in Germany, by contrast, was built in Berlin in 1915 and was discovered by archaeological team in 2015. The mosque, which was made of wood, was thought to have been intended for Muslim prisoners of war, as it was built inside a World War I era prison camp. This is the biggest nonsense story of the entire thing I'm going to read. And if there are any truck drivers out there, please immediately call in after I read this before I go off the air. The call-in number is 319-527-6706. If you're interested in calling in, please do. Press 1, and you'll hear why in a second. You're going to want to comment. I guarantee you a truck driver will want to comment. Here we go. This is from Voice of Europe. Germany will now train asylum seekers to become truck drivers. Due to an acute shortage of professional truck drivers, the German Trucking Association has launched a new program to train asylum seekers for the job. Austria's tabloid Wochenblick reports. A project, which is named the Drive into Your Future, Your New Future, intends to make it easier for asylum seekers to become truck drivers. In this way, the German Red Cross and the logistics organization want to alleviate the shortage of truck drivers. The concept was developed together with SVG, Driving School of North, reported newspaper DVZ. During the training, the candidates have to pass through 2 exams. In addition to its general suitability, the DRK also wants to check the language skills and the status of residence. In addition, the separate refugee representative should look after the participants during the 3 years of training. The initiative is extremely popular. Within a few days, 90 interested parties from all over Schleswig-Holstein and even Hamburg have reported that 50 more refugees have been placed on the waiting list. But not everybody's happy. We clearly say no, says the president of the Federal Association of Professional Motor Vehicles Association, Wolfgang Westermann. You cannot put everyone on a 40-ton and let them go with it, he says. Okay. Does anybody know what's the percentage of migrants or asylum seekers that have used jihadi vehicles, used trucks to kill citizens in Germany? What's the percentage? Anybody? Is it 10%, 20%, or 100%? If you said 100%, you win the prize because that is the truth. So they're going to give training to migrants who have previously, I don't get this one. Why would you give training to people to drive trucks? Because that's the population that's killing you. I just can't see that one. And since we're running low on time, and I sadly, we're never going to get through all these articles, but I do want to say that we have some outstanding hosts out there you definitely want to listen to.